Good afternoon and greetings. I'm Michal Ignatieff, Rector and President of Central European University, and I'm speaking to you from Vienna. We also have a campus in Budapest, but I'm in Vienna. I'm here just to introduce on behalf of the university an extremely distinguished panel, people who are leaders in European politics and in European thought. And I want to just say what a pleasure it is to welcome people of this stature to see you. I want to welcome Věra Jourová, who is the Commissioner for Values and Transparency in the Commission, and she was the Commissioner for Justice, and I had the pleasure of meeting her when we were going through the Lex CEU trauma that resulted in our expulsion from Hungary, and she was very helpful, and I want to welcome her and thank her for her work on behalf of the rule of law.
Thank you, Mr. Professor. The pleasure was mine to meet you, and thank you for inviting me.
Great. I also want to welcome Clément Beaune, who is the Minister of European Affairs in the cabinet of President Macron and was formerly his advisor on European affairs in the Élysée, and I also had the pleasure of meeting Monsieur Beaune at the Élysée when we were trying to gain support in our battle to stay in Budapest. And so I welcome Clément Beaune to this gathering. I also want to welcome finally MEP Šimečka from Bratislava, man after my own heart, a liberal politician, and in the heart of Central Europe, a distinguished journalist, activist, and now a member of the European Parliament. And finally, Daniel Kelemen, distinguished professor and commentator, who I think will be handling the questions. So I'd like now just to, again, to welcome these distinguished visitors to our campus remotely. Hope that there'll be a day when we can all be together in one room, but this is the next best thing. And hand it now off to Dimitry Kochenov of the Democracy Institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Ignatieff. It's a pleasure to welcome everybody on behalf of the Democracy Institute, which I have just joined. Of course, the rule of law has been one of my main passions, and I'm happy to welcome all of you from Budapest. So Democracy Institute sends a very simple and clear message. The Central European University, although it has officially moved, has not actually moved away from Budapest. So we're still part of this city, and we're still part of this country. And Democracy Institute has already organized a number of remarkable events. So you are following a whole stream of amazing speakers, and I'm delighted that you are joining us today on the backs of the greats like Commissioner Reinders, of course, of notable members of the European Parliament, like stellar professors, including Kim Lane-Shapley from Princeton, including Laurent Pech from Middlesex University, and also famous judges who are preoccupied with democracy and rule of law in Europe, such as Judge Sterk, who is the president of the European Network for the Councils of the Judiciary, precisely the organization that has been raising flags about the state of judiciary in Poland. So today's event is co-sponsored with the Review of Democracy, the flagship publication that we are launching at the Democracy Institute, and to which I hope you will be in the position to contribute. This event will also be featured on the webpage of the publication. And of course, we're all here today because we're all preoccupied with exactly the same, with the state of democracy and the state of the rule of law in Europe. The very fact that CEU is split between the two great capitals is a reminder that not everything is going as well as we would have hoped. So now it's time for me to say thank you once again and to pass on the word to Professor Kelemen, who will lead this debate.
All right, thank you so much, Dimitry, and thank you for inviting me to be the moderator of this discussion with such a distinguished panel. And I think what I'm going to do here is to open things up with asking each of our speakers to make a brief intervention of just 3 to 4 minutes just with their thoughts on the theme before us of the future of democracy in EU member states as it pertains to their own work and engagement in this. And then once we've heard from each of them, I'll start posing some questions to get them in dialogue with one another. And then we will turn things to the audience, collect some questions and answers from those who are watching this streaming. So if I could, I'd like to begin by inviting Commissioner Jourová to go first and offer your initial comments.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you see me, please? Yes. Thank you once again for the invitation. It's a great honor for me to speak in front of such distinguished co-guests and the audience. Well, I understand that the topic of today's debate is democracy, and here I will start with some worrying words, because we all see that democracy now is in crisis. True, not for the first time, but what worries me now that democracy is attacked on many fronts at the same time, from the extreme left and extreme right, from within and from outside the EU. And digital transformation and now COVID put additional strain on all of this. And for me, the common feature of the weakening of democracy is the erosion of trust. And trust is like oxygen for democracy. We trust in peaceful transition of power. We trust that we are all equal before the law. The authorities have to be accountable and are there to serve us and not us to serve them. Now I speak as a citizen. And that the authorities are here not to oppress the people and to act within the constitutional powers or competencies. And the EU, I am convinced about that, is the extraordinary manifestation of this trust. Without mutual trust in each other's systems, the EU cannot function. We trust that the ruling of a court in one country is fair and just for every other member state to recognize and enforce it. This is key for free movement of citizens as well as for cross-border business investments. We trust quality controls in one member state so that product circulated freely in our internal market is safe everywhere. We trust so much that our borders remain open. It's not true at this moment, but this is the COVID impact, unfortunately. But this trust is shattered, and this already shows consequences. We see courts in member states hesitating to use the European arrest warrant as they do not trust the judiciary system in another member state. On top of this, polarization or bubbles on social media are now increasing distrust to the authorities during the pandemic, create very fertile ground for extremist and authoritarian sources. So what should be done? We have to start from looking at ourselves. We, the Democrats, have to show that democracy can deliver. For me, it's shocking when I see the surveys in several member states where the people, up to 40%, are giving us the message, we do not believe democracy delivers benefits for us. So what will you do? I don't belong to the politicians who keep lamenting about populists and nationalists. That's why I say we have to start from looking at ourselves. And especially now during the recovery, it will be the most important thing. People have to trust that we allocate the money to help those that need it most, not those who already have plenty. We need the Recovery and Resilience Fund to support smaller businesses, not multinational corporations. We need to use the money to support our business and society to become greener and more digital. And we have to work together against undemocratic actions within the EU. Here, let me just mention the rule of law. I want to confirm that the Commission will not shy away from continuing to play our role as guardian of the treaty and launch infringement proceedings in the area of the rule of law. But not all rule of law matters can lead to infringements. And we can have a legal debate about that. I am aware that something that we are not doing enough many other things that we should not do anything. Yeah, so whatever we can do in this field will be criticized, but I am ready to discuss that. Not to sound pessimistic, I'm satisfied that we have achieved the adoption of the regulation which contains the conditionality instrument in the budget. And we will now have an additional tool at our disposal next to infringements or Article 7. We are conditioning the use of EU money by the rule of law principle. And this is a big step forward. We needed it. And I remember well when I came with this idea in 2017, it was in Vienna. There was a big outcry after I said it. How come you can condition the EU money, which is so automatic, which is the right to have money for everyone? And I said, no, there must be some principles respected in all the member states. Do we want so much that we want to see functioning judiciary in all member states and to send the money there to such place without any fear? So this is not an easy topic, the rule of law in the EU. We have started serious discussion with all the 27 member states on the rule of law issues. First ever in 2020, we issued and presented the rule of law report. And I believe it's a good platform, especially as a preventive instrument, because we can detect dangerous tendencies in some member states early on and start the dialogue. And we need all EU institutions and member states to take this seriously. Rule of law is a shared responsibility, and it can only be upheld if we all assume our part. And this is not an issue to be solved by a lonesome sheriff in the Commission only. I was called to be a lonely sheriff, so that's why I'm quoting that. Also, we should aim to disarm the enemies, or at least make it more difficult for them to use our freedoms against us. And let's take the example of disinformation, which has been weaponized by foreign and domestic actors to sow division and undermine our democracies. And the main aim of disinformation is not to win an argument. It is to undermine trust in our model. And this is why I proposed in our European Democracy Action Plan in December a series of actions against democracy. And I had a chance to discuss it with Minister Beaune yesterday and with other EU ministers. And there was a sort of very strong agreement that we have to do more against that, not at the expense of the freedom of speech. So we are not introducing censorship, but we cannot be passive on that. I know I speak too long, so I will conclude that I'm convinced we should not be naive. Such attack like on the Capitol in January this year can happen in Europe as well. And restoring people's trust to democracy can be our best cure against it. We must not be naive. We must not live in an illusion that democracy and rule of law will defend itself. No, it's our job to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those very insightful comments, and you raised many issues we'll come back to in a few minutes in the discussion. But first, let me just go ahead and turn things over right away to Mr. Clément Beaune, who is joining us from Paris, where he's the Secretary of State for European Affairs. Thank you so much, Monsieur Beaune.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Sorry for joining you a bit late, but I'm very happy to be on this panel and to see you all and to see Vice President Jourová 2 days in a row, because yesterday she mentioned we had this discussion at EU level on rule of law and the strengthening of our mechanisms. Maybe I wanted to, trying to be short, to touch upon 3 issues or 3 angles in this discussion. My first remark would be to say that obviously we thought that democracy supporting democracy, implementing democratic mechanisms was in a way a non-issue in the EU because it would go spontaneously. As we know, the EU project, starting with EU communities in the 50s, was an economic project and implicitly a political project, but democracy was in a way built in. So nobody thought it would have to be protected from inside, that member states within the EU would question democratic mechanisms and that we would need counter mechanisms, as with Vice President Jourová we are working on, to make sure that democratic principles are complied with. It's paradoxical, but we can explain by the history of this project that when you want to join the EU, and we have countries now which are in this process of negotiating the accession, you have to comply by a very strict rule book of democratic rules in the broader sense. But once you join, it was accepted, admitted that you will never re-question these principles. And de facto, we see that this happens. And this is a novelty in a way, and a shock in a way. All our debate about rule of law is a debate about this. How can you be a member of the EU and question some key rights, freedoms, elements of the liberal democratic model? The second element, which is of course very close to this thinking, is that we are again, because in a lot of European countries we have known this before in our history, we are again in these debates opposing sometimes democracy, meaning rule of majority, and liberalism, political liberalism, meaning protecting the rights of everyone, of minorities, of individuals. That is captured now in our treaties, in our legal mechanisms by the concept of rule of law. When I try to make a difference between rule of law and democracy, I think this is the way to define it. Democracy can be illiberal, as we see, and rule of law is about protecting, even within a democracy, the elements, independence of media, independence of justice, for instance, which are guaranteeing for everyone, as a group, as an individual, its own rights and key freedoms. And we see that we have democratic member states in the EU, democratic meaning respecting the rule of majority, maybe not a perfect democracy in terms of guaranteeing free campaigns and that, but democracies de facto, which are justifying by this democratic rule the fact that they are allowed not to respect the rule of law mechanisms, the rights of minorities, the rights of individuals. And Věra Jourová knows that from our daily work on respecting rule of law, and we have more and more tools in the EU, that this conflict between democracy and political liberalism is coming up again. The third element, which can be mixed, of course, with the previous ones, is the digitalization of our democracies, for the best and for the worst. I don't have to insist on the advantages that the social networks, that this accession to information, this access to information brings to us every day. We can all see it very well, and this is very positive, including to protect democracy in many cases, to organize demonstrations, to organize groups, and to defend rights. But also, as we see, it re-questions here again our whole model. We have to deal with private actors which are extremely strong and sometimes more powerful, stronger than public media, public authorities, politicians, public bodies. And we don't know so far how to regulate them, keeping this freedom that we need, but also defining rules that they have to respect, not to be allowed to do whatever they want. And we saw it in the US also with a very interesting debate about the Twitter account of former President Donald Trump, which I think was a good example of this lack of regulation. And of course, all the powerful attacks or transformations of our democracies that can be brought through the use or the misuse of these powerful digital actors, cyber attacks, and so on. And this is very fundamental, because if we don't define rules to regulate these platforms or these big actors, we have a problem to protect over the long run our democracies. So if we want to strengthen our model, it's not only about strengthening rule of law mechanisms, as Vice President Jourová mentioned, we have to do it, but also how we can organize this digitalization to make sure this does not become a kind of private monopoly in our democracies. Just a final word to say that we, I think, would have two remarks to capture all these three elements. First, we see, I was mentioning cyber attacks, that through this digitization and more generally the openness of our democracies, we see external powers outside Europe, authoritarian regimes, which are using the openness of our democracies to attack the model itself through financing of political parties. We know it happens from Russia and elsewhere, through cyber attacks, as I was mentioning, through fake news, and so on. They're attacking the fact that we have a public debate, an open public debate, pluralism in the media, in the political parties that are allowed to compete, and so on, to use it and to undermine democracy through its very mechanisms. And we have been too weak, I mean, it's a whole story of democracies, to protect democracy against the misuse of democratic mechanisms by the people who are the enemies of democracy. And this is a very topical debate, again, when we see what Turkey, Russia, and other actors are very well playing with our rules. The final element, to be more positive, is that all that I was mentioning, I think, starting with the awareness that even in a democratic family like the EU, even in a continent of liberal democracy like Europe, we need to protect our common projects, our democracy against these trends. I think this awareness has increased a lot over the last 2 to 3 years. We discuss rule of law nearly in every European summit now. It's not perfect, but we have developed mechanisms, Article 7, not to go into too many details that Věra mentioned, the action of our Court of Justice, our conditionality mechanism through EU financing and respecting core values and so on. I'm not saying it's enough, I think we should go further, but at least everyone is aware of this debate. When there is a problem in Poland or Hungary, it is a big topic in French or German or Czech or Spanish news. And this is very new. So we are starting to understand that it does not go spontaneously. It's not a kind of natural path towards more and more and more democracy. And that we have in the EU to define mechanisms to protect our own model. And this is all the work we are trying to do with this new mechanism of rule of law. I don't want to be too long. I've been already a bit longer than expected, but I wanted to open these doors for the debate afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, you've put a lot on the table for us to discuss, so thank you. Let me turn things over quickly to a member of the European Parliament, Michal Šimečka, and you have to unmute yourself, remember.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much, and thank you to the CEU for the invitation. It is indeed an honor to be able to take part in this panel. And a lot has already been said by Vice President of the Commission and by the Minister, so I won't repeat much of it. I completely agree with, but I would also like to state here that being a member of the European Parliament, that the European Parliament has been perhaps the strongest advocate for more action on the EU level to defend democracy and, of course, rule of law and fundamental rights, and remains the actor on the European stage which fights for these values. I have a few remarks, not particularly well structured, but a few remarks on the topic. And I'll start with a remark that I remember being at a conference a couple of years back, where an American academic, we were discussing rule of law issues in Hungary and Poland, and there was a US academic who asked me sort of, what's the problem for the EU that well, I mean, among the 27 member states, most of them are democracies, some of them would be non-democracies, but, you know, what's the harm? after all, in US history, I mean, there was a long time in which many US states had segregationist and I mean, frankly, racist regimes and policies. And well, the US did just fine. So what's the problem for the EU? And I think this is kind of the misunderstanding, and that for the EU, which doesn't obviously have a central government, it is precisely about that mutual trust that Vice President Jourová spoke of. So for us in the EU, for the EU project to sustain and to be viable in the long run, we absolutely need that mutual trust, which is underpinned by the belief that everybody adheres to the same values and the same principles. So here I would sort of restate the point that she made, in the sense that when we speak about problems of democracies, rule of law, fundamental rights in the EU, and when we see, when we talk about how it should be improved, is not just because of those values and their intrinsic goodness, and because we believe they should be universal or that they bring the best kind of governance. It's also because if we don't protect them, it's going to be, in practical terms, impossible for the EU to survive. And Vice President Jourová mentioned all these areas in which that trust and by extension that democracy needs to be there, be it the single market, being Schengen. Of course, if we want to speak of further integration in areas such as internal security, such as cooperation in law enforcement, all of that is predicated on the fact that we believe that each of the member states, their leaders are elected democratically, their authorities, their judges follow the rule of law and are independent. And once this starts to crumble, all the other policy projects in practical terms are in danger. So this is in a way an existential issue for the European Union. And as has been rightly said by the minister, this is a challenge which the EU is sort of structurally not fit for, because it evolved as a project of economic integration, as the tearing down of barriers to trade and to the freedom of movement. And at the very outset, it was sort of values were there implicitly, but it was always throughout the second half of the 20th century, it was kind of understood that it's the Council of Europe which deals with all the business of protecting democracy and human rights. So I think we absolutely need to sort of bring values much more prominently into EU policymaking and into the EU agenda. Now, and it has been happening to a certain extent. Last year, there's been lots of talk, lots of new instruments, lots of attention and political capital being spent on discussing the rule of law, and obviously these transgressions specifically in Hungary and Poland, and obviously there's been the threat of a veto. My sense is that the problem is that much has been said and perhaps also done on the policy level, and the regulation on conditioning of funds is good, but the situation on the ground is not improving. Is actually worsening. It's deteriorating. I mean, we see the latest problem that has developed over media freedom in Poland. So I mean, we can debate whether those instruments are progress, and to some extent they are, but we should judge the effectiveness of our policies on the situation on the ground, which is getting worse. So here I would still see the glass as half empty, unfortunately. And this is where I'm going to close my first intervention. Where I think we're sort of, and I know that we're constrained by obviously the treaty and legal basis and on stuff. I think we're still making the mistake of kind of separating conceptually rule of law and sort of attacking the problem of rule of law outside of the wider context of democracy and fundamental rights. I think we absolutely need to treat them and the backsliding on these values in conjunction. And here I would slightly disagree with the minister, who says that of course there are democracies which are illiberal. I think this is sort of a trap that we shouldn't really fall into, and Orban's trap in particular. And I admit that there is some philosophical tension between liberalism and democracy, but I would think that for the purposes of European societies and European integration, democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights are three sort of legs of a tripod, and all three need to be there for it to stand. Which is also why the Parliament, and I'll finish with this, why the Parliament and myself consistently argue that the EU instruments such as monitoring and enforcement should address the full scope of Article 2 and address democracy as well as rule of law and fundamental rights. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. And I'm going to start by myself sort of throwing out a couple questions that are open to all of you. Then after that, we'll bring in some questions from the audience. But I wanted to start out on this theme that's cut across all of your interventions in different ways. Kind of the last theme, Mr. Šimečka was pointing out about the relationship of rule of law and democracy. Our theme today in this event, although a lot of these kind of events explicitly say they're about rule of law, here we're talking specifically about the future of democracy in EU member states. Now, Minister Beaune, you said, that the EU we have democratic states in the EU, if not perfect. I guess I want to start with this that question by calling that into question. I haven't seen from any member states or from the Commission, anyone calling into question whether EU member states are in fact still all democratic. However, if we look at leading ratings bodies such as Freedom House or the VDEM Institute, they have already recategorized Hungary. And this is in newspapers all over the world getting widespread attention, saying Hungary is the EU's first non-democratic member state. Some call it electoral authoritarian, hybrid authoritarian regime. And I guess the question I want to throw out to all of you, and also, by the way, I would add, the OSCE heavily criticized the elections in Hungary, saying they were unfair in 2014 and 18. So I guess the question I'd like to throw out is, do you think that all of the EU member states really still meet the criteria to be called democracies? And if you do, well, what's the basis for that? Your thoughts on that? And anyone can jump in. Maybe Vice President Jourová, we could start back with you because you've waited.
Yes. Well, for me, the Hungarian situation is the most varying one. And I said it many times by diplomatic and maybe not so much diplomatic language. I said that in Hungary we see ill democracy, not illiberal democracy, and I insist that this is quite appropriate assessment, because when there are some important elements missing in the body, then the body cannot function well. And for me, there are two elementary things which have to be guaranteed in all member states. And it's the existence of independent judges and full functioning of judiciary. And the second, absolute guarantee that there are free and fair elections. And I have big concerns regarding the elections in Hungary because I am fully on the side of the Hungarian people. I wish the Hungarian society to flourish and the people to get out of this crisis and to have the chance to be active citizenship. It's something which is not about coming once in 4 years to elections. But still the elections, it's the milestone in every society. And I made furious some Hungarian high people when I said that in every state, including Hungary, the people must be absolutely sure that the last elections were not the last free and fair ones. Yeah, that's why we have such concerns about free media in Hungary. That's why we are now assessing the rule of law situation in broader context, what Michal Šimečka also referred to, not a salami method to take one Hungarian law or a Polish law or whatever law and say this article and this article is wrong, so let's put it to the court. No, we need to see the broader picture, because the accumulation of negative trends in judiciary, in media, in civil society and education, the cumulative effect means that suddenly we see that some of the member states may be outside of the framework of democratic principles, which we expect to be guaranteed in every member state. Yeah. So for me, Hungary is a very big problem, but at the same time, again, I have to say this is for the Hungarian people to cast their free vote next year. And I have to say that in the meantime, the Commission will do everything to cure the problems by means of our legal competencies, and at the same time, maybe to work on political in the political field. But over to you. If you have an advice for me how to proceed, I will be grateful.
Well, no, thank you. And over now to Clément Beaune, if you have some thoughts on that issue.
Yes, thank you. I think today, to be frank, I don't think we could say that we have any member states, even Hungary that Commissioner Jourová mentioned, or Poland, which are in a state of not being qualified as democracies. But as we know, it's not black or white. And I do agree with what Michal said. I don't want to be here misunderstood about the conflicts, as I mentioned it, between liberalism, political liberalism, and democracy. I'm not saying that they can be opposed or separated. I do believe that's exactly the situation we are in these two countries in particular, is that you use the rule of majority, which is there from the elections, at least at the beginning, to undermine counterpowers, elements of fairness, element of freedom, which are key to a sustainable democratic model, and to fully free elections over the long run, like pluralism of the media, freedom of the media, independence of justice, and so on. And then, when you don't have liberalism, in the end, you don't have democracy, that's for sure. But this is a process in which, at the beginning, you can say, but I've been elected, I can do whatever I want. And that's why in our model in the US, like as in Europe, we have, but it took time over history, linked the concepts of liberalism or rule of law, whatever we exactly call it, and democracy as a simple rule of majority. If we don't have them together, then of course we lose democracy. And this is the risk we are running now in the EU. That's why I think the mechanisms are so important, because if you don't act early in this process, over the long run, you risk that the basic core of democracy would be lost for good and for long. The other element, just to finish on this, I wanted to mention is that sometimes it's even more tricky in a way. And that's also where you can have a gap between democracy and liberalism, because we see that in all our democracies, on both sides of the Atlantic, that you can have people which are even well-informed, educated, and so on. So it's not only a problem of information, which are favoring strong leaders, powers, regime to some extent, or this attractiveness, in a way, of strength against what is seen as a weakness of democracy is something we always have also to fight for. And it's not only about preserving rule of law to make sure democracy is functioning. It's about being active in the political debate to explain, which is difficult, why an open debate, an open democracy, a pluralist system, and so on, is strong. Because people always have the feeling that it's nice and it's free, but it's not efficient enough, quick enough, strong enough. And I think we all have to stick to this narrative that democracy is strong. And this is sometimes difficult. It has to be strong against the misuse of rule of law. It has to be strong in its efficiency in public policies and so on. Otherwise, people will always have this impression that there is a trade-off between protecting them, being effective at what they need, today vaccine or security or whatever, and the complexity and openness of a liberal democratic system. And we know it's a challenge we have to defend every day, and the EU even more, because it's a democracy of democracies. So it's even harder and even longer sometimes to make function. I think it's extremely valuable, but we have to demonstrate it. And what we have seen in the debate before Brexit and after Brexit with the UK recently was sometimes about this. Why do we live in this club of democracies? Because it's so complicated to make work. that we prefer to forget about it. So I just wanted to make this point because I think this is the more tricky point. It's not about protecting rule of law, justice, media, and so on. It's about demonstrating the effectiveness of democracy every day.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Šimečka.
Yes, thank you very much. I would just perhaps, of course, agree with the fact that it's not a binary choice, a regime type. There are many, and there are shades of it, and you as a political scientist would be the best to address that. On the question of Hungary, I would be on the side of those who say it's no longer a democracy, or at least not the kind of democracies as all the other member states are. And the issue here is that in today's world, everybody calls themselves a democracy, and sometimes with an adjective. I mean, you might remember it was in vogue at some point, and the Russians called themselves sovereign democracy. Now, obviously, Viktor Orban says they're a liberal democracy. I think there's a good quip by Ivan Krastev that in the context of the Russian term, he says that sovereign democracy is to democracy as an electric chair is to a chair, meaning that it sort of kills the idea. And here I'm afraid that precisely because the Hungarian government is trying to do the same with the concept of democracy, I think I would say that it no longer should be categorized as such. Which doesn't mean we have to say it's an autocracy, but it's a regime that is hybrid, that is in some transition. And final point on how, and I think this also needs to be mentioned in this context because it rarely is in these various debates, is how interdependent our democracies are, in the sense that you have the Council and the European Council, which are very, if not the most important bodies in EU policy and legislation making. And in the Council, there are representatives, elected representatives of the member states, which legislate, along with the European Parliament, on laws that affect everyone. So even so it matters to me as a Slovak citizen, or citizen wherever, if, because the Council legislates for me as well, if some members of the Council are not elected democratically. So in a way, it undermines the entire legitimacy of one of the two legislators. So this is also kind of an implication that is often kind of glossed over, but at some point we'll have to deal with that. And I'm afraid that in the current setup, we don't really have the tools to address this problem. If, say, the worries of Vice President Jourová sort of, hopefully not, but if they are borne out, and if there really are doubts over national elections in the member state, what's the EU going to do? We don't have the tools to do anything about this. And that person, that prime minister or a minister, which sits there as a result of, say, rigged elections, he will, legislate for, millions of Europeans. But there's nothing at the current setup that you can do. So this is why I think it really needs to be, especially democracy, integrity of elections need to be front and center. Thank you.
No, great point. On the question what we can do, I want to bring up some questions about that from the audience. But first, our host, Dimitry Kochenov, wanted to take the floor first to pose a question before I bring in questions from the audience.
First, I would like to agree with everybody as much as it is possible, especially Vice President Jourová. The EU is nothing without trust. It's absolutely clear. And Minister Beaune, we need to protect this trust. So then, Michal Šimečka, what do we do? What do we do to move beyond what has already been done? But I would like to throw a new problem, if I can't call it that, into the basket, and that is the EU's own interinstitutional relations. Again, building on what probably Michal Šimečka has just mentioned, it's not only the non-democratically elected representatives on crucially important organs or institutions of the EU. It's also the democracy of the member states acting together, potentially pushing against the idea of the rule of law as is accepted by other institutions. And I'm referring to the occurrences of the last month, when Advocate General Sharpston released two of her shadow opinions, as she called them. And of course, to remind the audience, Advocate General Sharpston was on the Court of Justice for several terms, and she has been ousted from the court in September, although her mandate runs one year longer, and one of her nationalities, the UK nationality, was used by the member states as a pretext to accomplish that. Then when the Court of Justice was offered to react, the Vice President didn't say that it was lawful. The Vice President of the court said that it was not reviewable. So what we see is that the Court of Justice seemingly has violated the principle of the rule of law in the interest of the interstate democracy of the masters of the treaties. And since the Court of Justice refused to go against the sovereign, I wondered what the members of the panel could offer as their potential reaction, or what their views are on the current situation, because we obviously have the Court of Justice, which is not necessarily impeccably composed for all those concerned, and we have an illegally ousted Advocate General who keeps on releasing the opinions. So then, who is right and how to solve this problem? In particular, I'm turning to Vice President Jourová, of course, because the Commission is the guardian of the treaty, and obviously the treaty has been abused. At least this is what Advocate General Sharpston thought. It has democratic implications and rule of law implications from the supranational and also the national level. Thank you very much.
Right, Vice President Jourová, any reaction to that?
Yeah, when Professor said that he will add one more problem to the basket, I already thought we have enough. Well, on this particular case, I will not comment the concrete case. I am aware of that, but yes, we need to see the European Court of Justice as the highest authority for the interpretation of the EU law and for complying with the rules. So when we see problems on that front, of course, it doesn't make me very relaxed, I have to say. But I don't want to say more about this concrete issue, but maybe more general and shortly. I know we are running out of time probably. The issue of what's European and what's national sovereign. This is inherent part of our thinking about also the rule of law principle. And whenever we discuss the problems, so we see in several member states, we always have to think twice and analyze properly whether we are not interfering into the sovereign matters, because the rule of law, what is it? It's the division of constitutional powers, and constitutions belong to the space of the sovereign states in spite of the fact that they are European member states. So we have to be decisive when we see the competence, but careful when it is this not black and white space. And this concerns also the elections. Michal Šimečka mentioned that we are not equipped to protect the elections in the member states against dirty methods and against manipulation and so on. We are doing our best to recommend the member states what measures to take and what are the absolutely necessary preconditions for free and fair elections. And of course, I've been accused, yesterday I heard it from the Hungarian minister recently, it is the fresh memory, and from some other ministers, and Clément was there sitting around the table, that regarding elections, the European Union should be careful not to invade into the national sovereign matters. And my response was, yes, I fully respect that. And so let's work together, because if we have failures in one or two member states, then the situation will be, as Michal Šimečka mentioned, that there will be the leaders sitting next to each other. Some will rule with the democratic tools and playbook, and there will be others who will be elected undemocratically. And then I would like to see the trust and cooperation. And I could give you a long list of practical implications of the already now existing distrust. And when I go to Washington, I hear it there as well. Well, I heard it from Trump's administration. You want to exchange some data and some evidence for criminal proceedings? Forget it. We will have bilateral agreements with the member states. We cannot do agreement with the whole Europe because some of the member states do not comply. So, you know, practical implications, I have a long list of it. I don't have time to go into that. So, you know, this is my trick to avoid the answer on Dimitry. I gave you many other pieces of information, hopefully useful.
You can continue that somewhere else. Let me bring in some questions from the audience then. And I'm going to pool together a couple questions that touched on a theme really that Vice President Jourová brought up. You said at one point in your comments, democracy and rule of law won't defend themselves, right? They need defenders, right? So the first question is for Minister Beaune and then one for Vice President Jourová, because when it comes to defending these values, you know, there are tools. The EU has an extensive toolkit, but a number of the questions were about the kind of failures in deploying the tools effectively, or, you know, too little, too late, too weak. So first, for Minister Beaune, there was a question about basically the status of the Article 7 procedure. And I know you maybe can't speak for the council as a whole, but you can certainly speak for your government. And so, you know, the question we're getting is, you know, why are there no Article 7 hearings going on now? Why has there been no progress on Article 7.1 at least? And particularly with France, why isn't France pushing more for hearings right now?
Well, we've always supported very strongly the Article 7 mechanism, its activation, supported the European Commission in its use. Let's be clear about what it allows and what it does not allow, to be frank. Sometimes the perception is that it's useless, because we know that in the very end, when it could lead to sanctions, it's unanimity. And then if you have one member state beyond the member state which is targeted, which is against, and as we know now, there's a kind of deal between at least two member states, Poland and Hungary, you are blocked and you cannot do anything. I do not think that because of this, which is obviously a shortcoming of this procedure, I will not say it's useless, because I think in the toolbox we have, and we need to develop, it's the political element, if I can put it simply. It's a way to make the topic come on the agenda. It's a symbolic tool to some extent, and sorry for Vice President Jourová to put it like that. I'm not saying it to criticize the procedure. I think it's very useful, but it's symbolic, meaning that it's a way to bang on the door and to say publicly and to say loud, there's a problem here. And again, you may say, well, okay, fine, but then what do we do if we cannot go to sanctions? I think when we look at what happens in Poland, in Hungary, I would say maybe in particular in Poland at the moment, the fact that Article 7 was triggered for the first time, that again and again you have hearings and you have steps forward, even if it's blocked at some point, created for the people who are defending rights, freedoms, and who are active, to defend this. It created support, it brought support and energy in a way, because I'm very surprised that Michal and Věra knows this better than me, but when you travel there, you see that people who are fighting for these rights are making a clear link with EU values. Sometimes with EU flags and so on. So for them, seeing that there is support, I'm convinced, from the EU political support is helpful. And I don't think that if Article 7 would not have been triggered, we would have seen the same level of action, mobilization, and so on in this country. Is it enough? No. That's why I was mentioning other tools in this toolbox. I think our Court of Justice, not perfect, but we are a club of law, ruled by common rules. And it's very difficult for our country, even countries which are questioning some elements of rule of law, not to respect the rulings of the Court of Justice in the very end. Because if you start to do this, you say to other countries in other areas, economic or whatever, then you can disrespect the rulings of the European Court of Justice. And we know that very quickly, or they know that very quickly, it would totally destroy the whole EU functioning and be extremely detrimental to them. So I think the Court of Justice, this legal element beyond the symbolic political element of Article 7 is very powerful. And we have added another mechanism, which is this budgetary element, this conditionality mechanism, which will not change everything, but I think it brings another element of impact if there are breaches in key core elements of rule of law. Can we go further? Michal has produced a report on this. I think yes. In terms of sanction mechanisms, we are not there yet because we know that we would need to create new legislation at the EU level. It will probably take time. But I think we need to keep Article 7 in a central place in this whole scheme because it puts political pressure for real, I think. So it's not sufficient, but it's indeed useful and necessary, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Well, it's good to hear it'll be left in place then. There was some talk even of closing the procedure. So it sounds like it will be left open. So that's good to hear. Now, just continuing on this question, back to you, Vice President Jourová, because other people that submitted questions on this kind of what can be done were more directed at the Commission and infringements. And just to pool some of those together, the question I'd like to put to you, and don't get me wrong, those who follow this, we know you're a strong advocate on these issues. But still, when we look at the overall picture in recent years, right, despite that there have been some important infringements, the overall picture we see is that it seems like repeatedly the Commission as a whole kind of acts in a too little, too late fashion, right? So for instance, there was a good development just the other day, the Article 260 you commenced on the NGO law in Hungary, but using Article 260, right, has been very rare, very infrequent, despite some blatant defiance of ECJ rulings. And more generally, the Commission, the feeling, some of the questions poses, have they been aggressive enough with seeking interim measures, pushing these? So I guess, what can you tell us about, what the Commission, why that is, and whether the Commission could do more to be more aggressive with its use of infringements?
If somebody wants us to go aggressive, I will not be in that game because we have played by the rules and we have worked with the cards we have in our hands. And I don't agree that we are not doing enough. Whenever we see the clear-cut legal situation mature and ready, we launch infringement proceedings. We cannot afford to lose any of the cases. It would be a big, also reputational issue and the blow to our credibility. We have been winning all the cases we have submitted to the ECJ in this area of rule of law. And of course, the procedures are lengthy. We have to wait for the decisions. We are more and more now using the interim measures. We are planning not aggression, but we are planning speedy reactions now on several cases. But inevitably, we have to comply with the procedures which have to give time to the respective member state to respond and so on. So I know that many criticize the Commission for doing, how did you say it, too little, too weak, too late. I don't agree with that. And I want to say that we are doing everything possible and legal. And my concern is that this is a big political problem which cannot be cured by only legal instruments. Yeah, that's why we are adding declarations, dialogue, the rule of law report as a preventive tool, whatever you can imagine. And I really wish to see some progress, but we have to continue and we have to be tough. We have to be tough and precise, but not aggressive.
I might have used the wrong word. I meant tough, if aggressive.
Okay. I sometimes hear that we should be more activist activist. So this is not my plan either.
Dimitry, you're our host. I see that it's 10:30. So does this mean we have to stop now? Do we have time for one more question or something like that?
I think we could probably go one question over time.
Okay, I'll just throw out one question, and and really anyone can respond to it. But this was, again, in terms of what can be done, there was a lot of mention made by all of you of this new tool, the rule of law conditionality, something you all have been active in the development of. And I guess to summarize some of the questions that have come in on that, can we expect the Commission potentially to trigger this right away? And this kind of gets into issues to do with the Council, because of course the Council issued a statement kind of suggesting they should wait for development of guidelines, et cetera. People want to know essentially how quickly can we expect the Commission to put to use this new tool that it's been given?
My plan is to do it this year after we see the European Court of Justice decision on the legality of the instrument, because you know that Poland and Hungary want the court to issue the ruling on that. And believe me, I do not want to get into the trap of the second Article 7. This is not the same thing. And I fully agree with Clément, who said that this is not only symbolic. Article 7 is useful, in my view. It doesn't lead to sanction due to the unanimity, but it's important that the member states are speaking among each other that to do several things against the judiciary or media is a wrong thing, and that they do not want to accept that. Yeah, so this is important. But on the conditionality, it's not Article 7. There is the majority, qualified majority voting in the Council. And for the Commission, the task is clear: to assess the situation in the states and to come with robust legal arguments with a clearly proven link between the breach of the rule of law and damage potentially done on cost on the European money. So this is our obligation to do that. And I'm really, I worked 20 years in the field of EU funding, which gives me a special advantage now also to work out the guidelines for application of this conditionality, which will be legally sound and which will foresee the real application of this regulation.
Thank you so much. Any thoughts from even though it's for the Commission to trigger, from you, Mr. Šimečka or Minister Beaune, on this issue of the rule of law conditionality?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I should say that throughout the whole saga of the budget impasse last year, I think the Parliament played a very strong and very constructive role in a way in helping sort of bring this legislation to life. After it was, at some point over the summer, it seemed that it's going to be killed entirely after the summit in July. But I think, and to the credit of also my colleagues, that the European Parliament has pushed also for, and you might recall, for a much stronger, in a way, more effective mechanism with the reverse qualified majority and all that. So I think it was largely due to the, to the insistence and sort of consistency of the Parliament that finally we have the regulation in place. Obviously, the credit goes, to Vice President Jourová for suggesting it, but I think it was lots of the crucial support in the final sort of weeks of negotiation came from the Parliament, and also was helpful to those member states who wished to see a strong mechanism, but were sort of able to rely on Parliament to deliver it in the negotiations. What I'm of course a bit dissatisfied with, and everybody is, was the fact that Hungary and Poland were able to, in a way, negotiate this deferral, so to speak. That while you have a legislation already in force, but the Council or the leaders have agreed to wait, which might take a year. If it, that's probably the better scenario. It might take 2 years before it can be actually deployed, or that's kind of the political commitment, which to me also seems a bit dubious in the sense that how can political leaders in the European Council make a commitment, in effect, saying to the Commission, don't apply a legislation which is legally enforced. So that kind of is also not entirely in the spirit that the parliament intended, and especially since if it takes more than a year, it plays well into the hands of Viktor Orban ahead of his elections, that it won't be used before the Hungarian elections. I still hope that's not the case. So it's good that we have the regulation, although had the parliament its way, it would have been stronger. But I guess that's very much the kind of politics and the political problem of it that Věra Jourová mentioned. Finally, what I would like to say also as perhaps a way of closing remarks is that all of these instruments that we have, including the monitoring instruments, including the rule of law report, are as good as sort of our ability to use them. And the problem here, especially with the monitoring, I sense that is a lot of it depends on who's the commissioner. If Věra Jourová and Didier Reinders weren't
survive,
we might have had much less action on this front over the past year. Also, a lot of it on Article 7 depends who is in the presidency. We don't have to expect much from the Slovenian presidency for reasons that are unfortunately fairly obvious. But this is kind of also part of the problem that I think, and this is one of the things that I've tried to advocate for, is to sort of make it much more in a way binding and not reliant upon who is the actual person in the commission or at the helm of the presidency. So to have a monitoring mechanism, but also the other instruments sort of under one umbrella, which is legally binding in, for instance, some form of an interinstitutional agreement between the three institutions, but create some mechanism which is permanent, which is durable and not sort of fluid according to how the political winds sort of blow, so to speak. So I think this is also what we should be striving for. Thanks.
All right. Well,
I'm sorry, I have to leave.
Yes,
I'm very sorry.
We're ending now. We're
Thank
over
you.
time. Thank you for your patience. Minister Beaune, I wanted to give you the last word, but I understand you have to leave also.
Yes, but no, sorry.
Yeah, so I think I'll just hand things back, I suppose, to Dimitry to say goodbye on behalf of CEU.
And also on
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you to all of our speakers.